you just sat down and that John Williams score just comes on and you could just hear the roar and applause. It was magical.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. Last year, we talked about the Star Wars saga, one movie every month for most of 2019, leading up to the rise of Skywalker. And this year, we're turning our attention to Harry Potter. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce Bri from Geeky Girl Gab. Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so tell people a little bit about Geeky Girl Gab and what you and your co-host Candace do over there.
Yeah, so Candace and I met in high school, and we've been friends ever since. And both of us are deemed geeky girls, as you would say. And she came up with the idea for having a podcast and us just, either ranting or enjoying fandom life. And she's the one who started it and kind of brought me into her little podcast group that's also comprised of our other host, Vanessa, who we've also known since high school. So it's kind of just like friends who just talk about geeky girl stuff.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I've been on a couple times and I don't think I've ever been on a call with Vanessa. I think it's just been you and Candace.
Oh, that's right. Soon you'll have to join us when Vanessa's there.
Yeah, I'm like the Vanessa stand-in, I guess.
Yes.
Whenever there's a cat-related movie, whether it be Lion King or Cats. Which, by the way, so even since we did that episode, I'm still listening to it begrudgingly. It's on in some ways.
It's I
catchy.
feel like it's still it's catchy, but it's also haunting.
It's a curse. It's a gift and a curse. I feel
this is true.
Mostly a curse.
Mostly a curse,
which is a good segue, actually, because we're going to be talking about Harry Potter, which is all about curses and spells and such. So since we're starting this off with, obviously, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone if you're not in the U.S., which that really annoys me. It's like, can they just be consistent? Just call it the Philosopher's Stone here. We'll figure it out. It's like that. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
It is frustrating that, people in the U.S. are like, well, American kids won't understand what a philosopher is. Like, what? Really? Are we that dumb?
I mean, we'll leave that question hanging out there. Have you seen the news these days? There's pretty sufficient evidence to that point.
That's true. I feel like Harry Potter fans, though, we can get it.
Yeah, exactly. So tell listeners, and me, a little bit about how you got into Harry Potter. What was your first exposure to the franchise?
Yeah, it was in middle school. So I am dating myself. So hi. It was, I think, the third book had just come out, or the fourth book, because I remember going to the opening night. One of the book openings that like Barnes and Noble used to put. And the fourth book was the first time that I believe they had one of those. So I think I discovered it around the third book, and I remember, getting the first 3 for Christmas and then waiting for the fourth book. And, I kind of just fell madly in love with the book series. I was a bullied kid. So I feel like, when you're a bullied kid, you just feel like you do want to escape. And, Harry was in more of like severe abuse, obviously, than I was. But I feel like you could relate to that and relate to him. And then having this magical man, Hagrid, just come out and say, you're a wizard, and sweep you off to this magical world. I feel like a lot of it was escapism, and we got to experience this new life with him. And it was just filled with wonder and magic. And sure, there's bullies, but it was magic school you got to attend. And that's so much better than algebra. So I feel like when, for my generation of millennials, I feel like when we grew up with Harry, we grew up with all the characters, and we kind of just had that sense of longing for something better and more acceptance. And, I feel a lot with the books, they taught us, love overcomes hate and how to be strong when things got bad. So I think, it's kind of just built up this resilience, and it's been lasting ever since.
Yeah, I mean, it's the classic, chosen one narrative. It's Star Wars, it's Matrix, it's Lord of the Rings, it's, that kind of thing. And especially being set at this age where you're starting to realize, like, you're starting to, I guess, experience or more observe the adult world and kind of realize that you're approaching adolescence. You're not even there yet, but you're like you're a kid, but you're like, it's kind of in that weird middle ground. You're basically, Carrie's almost a tween in this one. I mean, he's like 11, so he's like getting there. But it's that period where all kids kind of feel like they don't fit in. Like they all feel like they're under the stairs, living under the stairs, in in a relative's house, kind of thing. Like everybody wants to be told that they're special, especially at that age. So I think, that's kind of the core of the appeal of this, like you were saying. And for me, when this came out, I hadn't read any of the books. I had actually just started college a couple of months before this came out in theaters. And I was working at the AMC Veterans over here in Tampa. And I remember hearing a lot about it. I remember working a concession like on opening night, and there were people coming up like with robes with the lightning scar on their forehead and all that kind of thing. And I was like, what is this Harry Potter thing about? I guess I need to see this. And then I remember seeing it with my family and totally getting swept up in it. And, feeling like I was witnessing something special. Like it felt like a Wizard of Oz kind of transformative movie for that generation. And, my brother was 10 when this movie came out. So he was right in the Harry Potter age. So he was really big on this franchise. So this was huge for the entire run, as far in my household. So, I mean, I really grew up surrounded by it a lot, and then went back and read the books and all that. So it's been an interesting ride seeing this franchise mature and as well as the actors kind of grow up in front of us.
Yeah, it's really cool that happened with the movie especially. You just felt like you got to know them, and just see them transform, like you were saying. It's like, I think they all started around the same age that they were supposed to be portraying in the books anyway. And, we followed them on this journey. It's just really cool. I mean, it really has stuck with me. When I travel, I make it a point to buy a Harry Potter book wherever I go. So I have like a South Korean version of the Philosopher's Stone. I have the Scottish version, which I can't really read. I mean, I can't read the Korean one.
Yeah, either. I was about to say.
I mean, hopefully one day. But yeah, and then I got to go to the Warner Brother studio tour in the UK, and it was honestly the most amazing time ever.
Well, not only that, I mean, as the books hit, because the first one came out in 1997, and the movie, I think the Goblet of Fire, the fourth book that you were mentioning, which, by the way, it's funny now looking back that it's hard to imagine there being that kind of outpouring for anything being released in physical form at midnight at this point.
I know, it is weird, but I remembered, I mean, my mom was like, fine, you can go, we'll get the book, but you can't read past, you have to go to bed. And I never would. I would just stay up reading. But like, it was a whole thing. Me and my friends would go, we dress up. I mean, there was this tremendous just like joy and murmur when you were all there collectively together. It wasn't waiting for the movie. It was waiting for a book. And I don't think any other book has really made an impact like Harry Potter has.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's the crazy thing too. Like I said, it was starting with the books, then the movies, and now it's evolved because, as you said, there are people your generation that grew up with this from when they were Harry's age on, and now it's a theme park at Universal and multiple rides. Like there's multiple sections. I don't know how familiar listeners are with theme parks, but like, here in Florida, it's all about Harry Potter. Like all the billboards are Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey and Harry Potter and Hagrid's whatever. Like everything is like a new Harry Potter attraction like every year basically. And it's become this is the reason why I wanted to do this franchise after Star Wars. It's become like a fandom on the level of Star Wars. There are people that grew up with Harry Potter in the same way that the previous generation grew up with Star Wars and the original trilogy. And I think that's really powerful. I mean, I don't think there's been a franchise that has had that, cinematic franchise that has had that impact since Star Wars.
Yeah, I think you're right. Twilight can't compare.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, Hunger Games was successful, but again, there's no theme parks really of it, as far as I know. I'm sure they're working on something as ill-conceived as that might be. I guess the MCU is up there, but that's, again, that's decades of material, and this is a kind of a singular story and a singular set of characters in the way that the Star Wars trilogy was. So it's interesting to look back on the fact that this took a decade to tell this story, and just kind of looking at it now from with a little more hindsight.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I don't even think Lord of the Rings really, I mean, granted, I think the midnight showings were popular for Lord of the Rings, but it wasn't the same. Like, yeah, I think you're right. Star Wars and Harry Potter are pretty much on par.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is crazy to even say out loud.
It's the kind of mainstream, like, exactly. Like Lord of the Rings was big, but it's not. Harry Potter and Star Wars are one of those things that, like, it's like a rite of passage. When you reach a certain age, you got to watch the Harry Potters, you got to watch the Star Wars. You're gonna have merchandise. You're gonna be like play video games with it. Like, it's not. I don't think Lord of the Rings had that same level of, I guess, saturation.
Yeah, and I do think, going back to your point of like kind of the everyman, Luke and Harry are both really great examples, like Joseph Campbell's, of that every hero, the hero's journey. And maybe it was because they were simple in a way, but still complex, that really resonate with people. Because Lord of the Rings, I think, was really great, but it didn't have, like, I guess, the simplicity. Maybe Frodo was a little convoluted at times,
right? Plus,
for people.
It's also more of an ensemble cast too, I think.
Yeah.
I think with Luke Skywalker and Harry Potter, there's, as you said, there's an everyman quality there, but there's also a singular focus, and they're discovering this world in the way that we are. Like Luke's, like in both A New Hope and Sorcerer's Stone, the lead character spends most of the time being like, "What, you fought in the Clone Wars? What? I'm not a wizard. What are you talking about?" Like, basically, it's the sense of wonder that those two movies bring. And in particular, I think that's what makes this movie really stand out in this franchise, is that it's the first time you see Diagon Alley. It's the first time you see, Quidditch. It's the first time you're introduced to the approach to Hogwarts Castle on the in the boats, or the platform 9 3/4. Like, it's the first time you're experiencing all this as it is for Harry. And I think it's easy to get swept up in that, basically.
It really is. Just as you were even mentioning, like, places and things, like, my whole body was just filled with delight. It's, that first time I opened that book, or that first time I was sitting in that movie theater watching, the screen come up, and, the WB logo happened, and then we get swept away into, Pivot Drive. It really is that of, wow, this is happening. And, it was so, I mean, I can't even sometimes talk about, because I get choked up in just like the wonderment of it all.
That John Williams score, which, again, who did Star Wars.
Yeah.
So the Warner Brothers shield comes on, and all you need is that ding, 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 ding. And you're like, oh, it's Harry Potter. It's happening.
Yeah, it's really, kind of like what Cats tried to do with Victoria, was make her like her point of view of welcoming us into this world. It's nice that we had Harry to guide us through everything. We were experiencing and learning everything with him. And I mean, what an amazing job the first movie does with really bringing to life what we read on print. For me, at least, I actually thought the first movie did a powerful job of, like, showing us the world and just like, oh my goodness, is this real? Like, I want to go there.
Well, we'll get into the details of that in a little bit. But generally, before we delve into Sorcerer's Stone and really kind of focus in on this movie, I do think that the difference between Cats and Harry Potter is the world actually makes sense here. And, J.K. Rowling was so detailed in her description of the lore and the world building and everything, everything fits together. Regardless of how you feel about the Fantastic Beasts franchise and whatever the hell that's doing, I think with this story, she really had a vision and she executed it really well.
Yeah, I actually, how I got my Harry Potter book from Scotland is because I went to Edinburgh. And, I got in kind of late at night. I didn't really get to take in the architecture because it was at night. I just had time for like dinner and then go to bed. And when I first woke up and I got to venture outside, I thought I had stepped into Hogsmeade. It was just straight out of the book. And I know she wrote there at the Elephant Cafe, which I got to, go inside. I got a coffee and it was honestly magical because I was like, oh, wow, she wrote, some of the book here and she, kind of based everything around Edinburgh and you can really tell. And it was magical. I couldn't believe my eyes.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that the Harry Potter franchise kind of gets taken for granted about it, I guess, is just how well written those books are. Like that, she does have a way with language and description and just painting a picture so that people that are fans of the books, when this first movie starts, it really like everything feels like it matches what was in their heads, which is really hard to do. And with all the YA stuff that came after this and all the fantasy stuff that came after this and Lord of the Rings, I don't really think anything was able to recreate that. And it's also on the page I haven't read the Twilight books, but I'm not particularly optimistic about the writing quality necessarily. So it's like,
not that great.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I did see all the movies though, because I try not to be the kind of person that's tearing something down without having seen it. So I made myself watch all 5 Twilight movies so that I could be like, yep, they're terrible. I've seen them.
I actually recently watched those myself, and yeah.
Eclipse is a little bit of a guilty pleasure, honestly. I haven't rewatched it since theaters because that one, I think that's the only one I did see in theaters. I actually do think that's kind of entertaining in again, kind of a Cats sort of way.
So bad it's good.
Yeah, a little bit. Because it's just like, now we're really off topic, but it's kind of Edward and Jacob just like trying to outman each other, I guess, at certain points in the movie. It's just like, wow. But I digress. So,
well, like,
go ahead.
I guess with the characters too, the characters are painted in such a way I felt like I knew every character. I felt like I know the characters who are only mentioned a couple of times, like Lee Jordan, like his announcer voice, like that's something I will always remember, like is just him. And like, he's the announcer dude at the Quidditch pitches, like you feel like every single person. And that I think is hard to accomplish.
Yeah, it's a world that feels lived in, I think. And that's the bottom line. I think before we get into any more specifics on the movie, let's just like play a little bit of the trailer for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone right now.
Did you ever make anything happen? Anything you couldn't explain? You're a wizard, Harry.
I'm a what? Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry.
In a few moments, you will pass through these doors and join your classmates.
Keep an eye on the staircases. They like to change.
Good afternoon, class. Welcome to your first flying lesson. Stick your right hand over the broom and say up.
Wow.
Mr. Longbottom, exactly where do you think you're going?
that was a little bit of the trailer for Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, directed by Chris Columbus. This came out in November 2001, and it actually made $978 million worldwide in 2001. Like now, hitting $1 billion is like a benchmark. Like you're not successful. Like I keep seeing articles about The Rise of Skywalker hit $1 billion, but it's still kind of a disappointment because it cost 300 and then like double that for marketing and all of that. But this made 978 like almost 20 years ago on a budget of 125, and it was actually at the time of its release the second highest grossing film of all time after Titanic, which I totally didn't realize that, I guess, worldwide. So that's kind of insane to think about.
That is. I didn't even realize that, to be honest.
And I think with the movies, there's also, I think, the consistency of it, that they were all, with the exception of Order of the Phoenix, written by Steve Kloves. So you have that kind of execution of J.K. Rowling's vision. And I think that really helps as well.
It does when you have people who really understand what you're trying to accomplish. And I feel she had such a hand in the movies, which I feel like some writers don't get, to really make her vision come to life. Yeah,
I think so. So when you saw this, you had read the books at this point, is that correct?
Yes. That was 2001, so I was a freshman in high school. Yeah, so at that time, not all the books had come out yet. And so just having, I think just waiting for the books and just having this come out, I was just thrilled to have something. And I remember going to midnight showing. I mean, my friend Liz and I, we were just like bouncing up and down, like couldn't contain ourselves. How about you? Like, you saw it in theaters around that time as well?
Yeah, I saw it completely blind. Like I said, I was working at the movie theater, and I saw people coming. Like I saw how busy it was opening weekend, and like I said, people were in costume and things like that. So I went in just knowing, okay, it's a kid, he learns magic, cool, whatever. And then I went to see it. I was like, I got to see this, because even then I was a student of pop culture. So I checked it out, and I got swept away in the whole thing. And like I said, I think it does such a great job ushering you into that world. The way that the slow reveal of the entrance to Diagon Alley, and just the wide shots of the approach to the castle, and the introduction of all the characters, and how charming are Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson in this. As child actors, there's you can kind of see that they're a little bit rough around the edges, but I think for the most part, their charisma carries them through it.
Oh yeah, and it almost helped. Like there was an awkwardness about it, but I was like, I was awkward at that age.
Right,
like
exactly.
It felt very real, and I just love when she's like, I'm Hermione. Like you could just tell. It was just like you could just tell they got who they were, which I think was a feat for child actors to really kind of know who you are. And yeah, they weren't polished, but I almost feel like that helped them, that they weren't. And I mean, it is interesting, though, hearing your perspective of watching it for the first time, because I almost felt like I had a bias when watching it, because I just love the book so much that, there's almost a moment of course I was going to like it. I love the books.
That's how I am even now with Star Wars. Like The Rise of Skywalker, I have lots of issues with, but I'm like, at the end of the day, it's Star Wars, so I'm not going to say I'm not going to rewatch Star Wars. It's like, when you're into a fandom, I feel like for the most part, you're kind of in it till the end. Like it's an everlasting thing. And I think that Harry Potter is that definitely applies here. And I agree with you as far as the awkwardness of the performances. And I think Emma Watson is easily, it's also her character, but she's easily the most confident on screen. I'm thinking particularly on the train where she's like, oh, I'm Hermione Granger, like you said. And then she says, you're doing magic. Let's see then. And she's like ready to judge how well he's going to do the spell, and kind of comes in and owns it. Like, I think from this movie, you can already tell, well, she's going to be she's the natural of the three of them, like easily. And I think that's come to fruition. I mean, look, she's in Beauty and the Beast. She was in The Bling Ring, and She's in Little Women now. So, I mean, she's definitely got the most established career of the three main stars.
Oh, definitely. It's funny, though, because I did go see Daniel Radcliffe on Broadway. I saw him in the musical How to Succeed in Business Without Even Trying. And I saw him in Equus.
Yeah, I remember when that happened. And I think it was pretty controversial because of the content of Equus and Harry Potter. Yes. Yeah. So how was that? How was that experience seeing him on stage?
Well, I was in the second row. I did go see. Flew to New York. My mom was like, "I got you a Christmas present." I was like, "Great." It was interesting because, like, you know, I grew up with him. You know, he was on screen from, you know, the first one to the last one. But actually, his acting was superb. I think he sometimes is very underrated, but I think he likes playing those like more offbeat roles now.
Have you seen Swiss Army Man, by the way?
Yes, I loved it.
That's a great movie, but a very strange movie. Like,
it's very
one of the
strange.
Weirdest movies I've seen in the last few years, for sure.
Yeah, but great script, and I thought the acting was great. And you know, I think he likes playing these offbeat characters in these weird movies because of just how mainstream Harry Potter ended up being. But I think, you know, the kids also have such an the kids, they're like my age. These actors have such an appreciation for the books as well. That's so interesting of, you know, them growing up reading them as well and just being able to say these iconic words and, you know, the spells and everything. So it's really just kind of, like crazy in a way to think about all of us grew up with this. You know, it wasn't like Star Wars. It wasn't where they created magic with a script for the first time and they didn't know whether it was going to flop or not. You know, they kind of already knew it was iconic. And I think that's almost a pressure as well. You know, these three kids who got cast in this movie, you know, I think they knew what they were getting into, and it's almost scary. And I think they did an amazing job for having that, because, you know, people, they'll judge you so quickly.
I mean, look, just like a couple years before this, look what happened to poor Jake Lloyd.
Oh gosh, yeah. Didn't he receive like death threats?
Something like that, yeah.
Oof. Yeah, people, that's not nice.
He's just a kid. It's not his fault that George Lucas doesn't know how to write dialogue.
It's really not. I mean, and so I feel like, you know, if the movies were bad in any way, I think a lot of blame would have gone to the three main, you know, actors, Emma, Rupert, and Daniel. And, you know, luckily that didn't happen.
I think it's a testament to the strength of the material, too, that they were able to get, you know, Richard Harris, R.I.P., and Maggie Smith, and Alan Rickman, R.I.P., and Robbie Coltrane, and all these, like, really respected, you know, British actors of stage and screen to populate all these roles throughout the whole franchise. Like, it became almost like, you're a middle-aged British actor. What are you getting in Harry Potter at a certain point?
Yes. I mean, John Cleese nearly had this Nick, and I'm like, they got John Cleese for this role?
To float by and make, like, you know, a decapitation joke. And
yeah. I was like, really?
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
I think if you weren't in Harry Potter, they're like, well, why? What happened? What was wrong?
Your agent's almost not very good.
Yeah, it's almost like their Law and Order. Like, you know, there's a joke. Every actor in New York has been on Law and Order.
Right. And, you know, you were mentioning as far as like introducing the world, do you think, you know, I guess looking back on it now, do you think Chris Columbus was at the time, I guess, a good choice to do this? Because he was most known for, you know, Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire. He hadn't really done anything like this scale, really, that I can think of. Or this, in this, I guess, so what's the closest thing he did to fantasy? I'm thinking like Bicentennial Man or something like that. And, you know, what was, you know, it's interesting that I think they had other directors kind of being bandied about, like the Zemeckis's and the Spielbergs, people that had worked in this kind of realm before. And I think Chris Columbus does hit a very Spielbergian sort of sense of like awe here. But it feels like sort of I don't know, it's a little bit of a left turn for him. I mean, I guess he wrote, because I'm looking up his filmography now to make sure I know what I'm talking about. He did write The Goonies and things like that. And obviously with Home Alone, he had experience working with kids. But yeah, this came right after A Stepmom and Bicentennial Man and then Harry Potter. So what do do you think that was a good choice, I guess?
I think it ended up being a good choice. I do feel like people were like, really? Him? But I feel like The Goonies was, coming to age story. I don't really particularly like The Goonies, which might be shocking to people.
I actually just saw it for the first time like last year, and I was like, I mean, it's fine. If I grew up with it, I would have been like, this is great. But seeing it at 30-something, I was just like, okay, I mean, I guess it's fine.
Yeah, I was like, this is disturbing. I mean, to me, and I like disturbing things, so for me not to like it, I don't know what that's about. But I mean, The Goonies, but I think Home Alone had that sense of, I don't know, he's Home Alone. He's the center point of the movie. And, it's almost like his journey, his coming to himself, with a family that didn't really, not necessarily care about him, but, it's a busy family and things can get lost. So, I guess he's used to working with kids, but in the end, I think he did a really great job. And I don't know if that's, again, to go back to the source material, he had great material to work from. I think JK had a vision and he executed it well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we mentioned Home Alone, and in that it's pretty much just the magic of Christmas, and here it's literal magic. I think he's good at the, sentimental, schmaltzy, whatever you want to call it, depending on your view of it, I guess. But he's good at the whole vibe of these early Harry Potter entries, especially the first one, where everything is coming from that sense of wonder, that sense of family, that sense, like the way it ends, the iconic ending to this movie where he's like, it's going to be weird going home. And it's like, I'm not going home. Not really. That whole like heart tugging moment where the train takes off and you're like, yeah, see, that's why you hire Chris Columbus, to send you out with the feels of a Harry Potter movie. And I think in Chamber of Secrets, he does that kind of that same trick at the end. But I feel like these two movies are very slavish to the novels. And by that, I mean that you can almost feel the chapter breaks. Like, all right, that was the chapter about the letters arriving. Here's the chapter about the train. And now the Diagon Alley chapter. And I think that works in the first one because you're introducing the world. But when you get to the second one, it feels to me a little clunkier. So I don't know. I don't know if he was the right fit for the second one per se, but I think the first one, establishing this world, what it looks like, and the emotions that he's trying to pull from the audience, I think it really works well. And that's kind of a surprise looking at the rest of his filmography.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you about the second one in particular. But for this one, you're right. It didn't matter that it felt like, all right, let's move on to this one. Let's move on to this one. Because especially for people who didn't read the book, I think the first one allows you to follow along and catch up. As someone who read the book going into it, I knew exactly what was going to happen, but it still filled me with like wonder and like, oh my gosh, they made that happen. Oh, wow. That's how oh, wow. But for someone who didn't read the book, I think it was a great follow along. This is really helped take you step by step into this world because, like you who didn't read the book, I helped with that, it just let you become invested in the world. Whereas I think then from probably the first book on, like, okay, we get that now. Right. Now we can move on.
Yeah, it doesn't matter so much in this movie if there's, and I don't really feel like there is, if there is anything that the movie introduces that doesn't pay off or play into the actual plot because it's an introduction. It's like, this is the Hogwarts. This is how this works. These are all the characters you need to know. This is your backstory with Voldemort. Oh, sorry, you know who. And and then when you get to
his name.
That's true. What is that? Fear of the name only increases fear of the thing itself. But in like Order of the Phoenix, I think Hermione says that.
Yeah.
I haven't rewatched
exactly.
all the movies yet. I have to be doing that little by little, I guess. But they're like I said, I've seen them so much that they're up there. But when you get to the second one and it's like Cornish pixies, and like, okay, what does this have to do with anything? Like, let's get past that. Just to be like, introducing additional elements because they're in the book doesn't cut it anymore. And I think by the third one, they kind of hit their stride and we're able to more cleanly adapt the important elements of the story. But so that's kind of my thoughts.
I hate the third movie, but we're not here to talk about
Wow.
that one.
Oh, no. We have to talk briefly about it. What's your issue with the third movie? Because that's one of the more beloved. Like when I said that I was, on my Facebook, my personal Facebook, I said I was going to do this. That was one of the previous guests on the show. He just jumped on it. Like, I got Azkaban. I was like, okay, well there, I got one down, so 7 to go. So what's your beef with year 3?
Well, okay, so year 3, my beef was I think they stayed in their Muggle clothes way too long. I had a lot of and also the transitions. I hated those. I thought those were pointless, especially with the Whomping Willow. I was like, all right, give me more plot. Let's get past the Whomping Willow tree, please. And I just felt like they stayed on it way too long during transitions, and it was driving me crazy. And also, a lot of my friends who hadn't read the books, who were going, still seeing the movies, a lot of them were like, wait, well, how did this happen? How did this happen? And I think they left out some really important plot points.
I agree with that. I agree with that, actually.
Yeah, and so I was like, instead of those stupid tree transitions, give us more of the plot. Let people understand, which is what I think, Christopher Columbus did well. And it could have just been utilized a little more in the third movie. And I think I would have been happy with it because there's some points in the third movie were great. I love Alfonso Cuarón. I think, the vibe of the movie was great. How it was, we're not in happy-go-lucky land anymore. We are making a transition to the darker era, before everything kind of happens, but I just felt like there's juicier stuff that were left out. And, it was one of the more confusing movies for a lot of my friends who hadn't read the book. Because Star Wars is obviously always on my brain. I'm thinking of now the comparison, like with the sequel trilogy, how Force Awakens happened, and then everybody was like, it's too similar, and then Last Jedi happened. They're like, it's too different, and they're like, all right, back to this, and they're like, no, what did you do? Now nobody's happy now. And I feel like the early Harry Potter movies, you can kind of see that sort of reactionary thing where they did the first one, it worked. They did the second one, and again, it was getting criticized for a little bit of what I said about kind of being overly long, unnecessarily including things that aren't relevant. And then the third one they cut out, and I think you're probably, if you're thinking what I'm thinking you're thinking, it's the Marauders map and a lot of that stuff, which is completely and then I think that their thinking was just to put it on, put it aside and then reference it later. But because the directors kept shifting from movie to movie until 5, that just never happens, and they just never acknowledge it at all. And that's really awkward. It is, and it's one of the most important parts because it is a pivotal plot point, especially for the third. And it's like, wait, hold on, can we rewind a moment? And I don't care that Spew got left out in any of the movies, but that's important, like wicked important. And yeah, it just bugged me with this stupid tree transitions. I just hated that. But yeah, I think fourth, they kind of came into a little more of their own. That was probably one of my favorites. But yeah, I have beef with the third one. I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Well, like I said, I think it's the lack of consistency, that the screenwriter was the same, but the directors were all over the place. And then when you get to 5, you don't have that problem because it's David Yates just stuck with it all the way through the Fantastic Beasts movies. Like he's just like, I'm riding this Harry Potter train all the way to the bank from platform 9 3/4 to the bank, and that's it. Yeah, I'm just gonna stay here.
I mean,
another chocolate frog, please.
My good sir, yes, keep them coming. Pumpkin pasties.
Exactly.
But yeah, I like we were saying, I think the first one, it just takes us on a journey and welcomes us to the world. And I think, you know what, Christopher Columbus, you did a good job there.
Yeah, I think so too. What about, I feel like we should talk about the rest of the cast a little bit more. Let's talk about Richard Harris, and I guess we can kind of compare his Dumbledore to, totally Michael Gambon. I had like a brain issue there for a minute, like a brain fart or something.
You need to remember all.
Yes, I do. I really do. Lately, I feel like I could use a time turner also, just so I can get things done. Oh,
that'd be nice.
I know.
Yes.
Well, see, that's my other thing with not to go back to this, but why I like the third one is I'm a sucker for anything time travel. So you're mashing up time travel and magic, sign me up. I mean, that was also why I feel like Avengers Endgame was made for me. It's like superheroes and time travel? Hells yeah.
You're like, yes, this is me written all over
Exactly. So, what are your thoughts on Richard Harris's more regal take on Dumbledore? And then you get to Michael Gambon, and he's basically kind of an old hippie, I guess, sort of. He's just like a totally different vibe, which I think it's good that they didn't just have Michael Gambon aping Richard Harris's take, though. But did that match, like, which one of those Dumbledores matched what you had in your head when you were reading the books?
It's interesting. I always, from the first time you meet Dumbledore in the book, he had, kind of slightly heeled shoes on, purple robes. And, I think he was mischievous. There's always a glimmer in his eyes. There's always like a phrase and a little smirk at the end of it, like he knew more than he was letting on to know. And I think Richard Harris was a good first choice. In the fact that I think he had those sly remarks, that hint of I know something there. I'm not going to tell you yet, but it's there, and I think he was lovable and he was soft. But I think Michael Gambon, I think he gets a lot of bad rep because of what happened in the fourth movie. Of how he reacted, and he said, "Did you put your name in the goblet of fire?"
I remember.
All those scenes are my favorite. And I think besides that, from that one line, because I will say I loved in the book how it was supposed to be delivered, but he made it his own, so I can't be too mad about that. I think he's a little tougher at times as a Dumbledore. You sense what he means in a way that you didn't with Richard Harris. Richard Harris, I feel like, his Dumbledore, you always kind of had to be like, wait, what did he mean by that? And with Michael Gambon's, you're like, oh no, he means that. Like, I don't even need to question what he means. And I think, maybe there could have been a middle ground Dumbledore who was just slightly eccentric enough, but had the hints, that sly remark and that little, like, I'm going to bring you along when I need to. But I didn't mind how either of them were. And maybe that's just because, like, Richard Harris was the first one and he's Dumbledore, that's who we were introduced to on screen as. And, he will always be in my heart, Michael Gambon, I mean, he did a good job though. Like, I feel he was there was this intensity about him, but those movies were welcoming the intensity, with the darker shifts and everything. So, I mean, I don't know if I really fit the book Dumbledore, but I feel like with what the movies did, I think they were both good choices.
Yeah, I have this thing that I say a lot with the Disney live action remakes because, we talked about Lion King and how it was terrible because it's the same. And so I feel like if they're going to make it either better, which is really, really hard, or different. And I think in the case of Dumbledore, like at least he did his own version of it. Had he just come out and tried to ape this performance, I think it would have been terrible. But like, as you said, we have instead two very different interpretations of this character, both valid and both kind of befitting the tones of the movies in which they appear, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think given how the movies went, they were good choices for that. I think, there was hints of Dumbledore's, I guess you can say, sexuality in the book. And now that J.K. Rowling kind of came out and said it, maybe I don't know if both of them really, in the head fit still, but I don't think that really mattered. So almost I'm kind of glad they just went about how they interpret him instead of trying to making him maybe something different.
Right. What about Maggie Smith as McGonagall?
Oh, God.
She's so great.
She can't do anything wrong.
I know.
Honestly. Like, I mean, she was perfect. And that Mr. Potter, like, I was like, sold. Yes, that's who.
And she similarly is kind of always, putting the pressure on the kids, but also kind of has a little bit of the Dumbledore, like looking out for them, and ultimately kind of bends the rules to help them out when she can, and that kind of thing. And I think, as the head of Gryffindor House, I mean, she's really a key figure in this story, and it's essential that they have an actress that's as eminently likable, but also has that authority and that warmth right underneath the authority that Maggie Smith has.
Yeah, like I wouldn't want to piss her off, but at the same time, I want to please her. But at the same time, if I need to rebel, I'm going to do it and be like, you would have done this yourself in my position. And she would have been like, you're right.
She'll get mad at you and be like, 10 points to Gryffindor.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like she got the understandingness of McGonagall, because I think McGonagall was a fierce student growing up and a fierce woman. And now she's just, has that authority, and she's going to be like, don't do anything too stupid. Do it.
She wisely keeps her human form and her cat form separate, so there's no digital fur confusion.
Yes. Oh gosh. Now you're just trying to make me picture Maggie Smith as like the same as
Deuteronomy.
Judi Dench,
yeah.
And now I'm terrified. Oh no.
She dodged a bullet. She's like, I did the whole cat thing back in the day. We're good.
A better cat thing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. I think arguably I'd say not arguably so much for this movie, but I really think Robbie Coltrane's Hagrid is really the heart of this movie, but kind of almost its second one. Like, I feel Chris Columbus really hones in on that character in both of these movies. Because he is Harry's introduction to the world. He's kind of our introduction to the world. And he is, really the first friend Harry makes, kind of ever, I guess, in this movie. Yeah. And, outside of living under the Dursleys' staircase, cooking them dinner and sicking a snake on his cousin, I think it's like, this is like, it's the first time anybody is like legitimately kind to him. Making him a birthday cake and all of that.
Oh, that was the best. Like, the so best. And I love, like, they got his spelling, how Hagrid spells and everything. He really captured that character like no one else. I couldn't imagine a single person playing Hagrid other than him.
Yeah. And his role obviously kind of diminishes as it goes on. But I think in this first one, he's so important. He's arguably kind of probably the fourth main character of this movie, really, after the main kids.
Oh, definitely. Especially with his, I never said that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is the best.
Well, he's like the, unwitting, like source to them, to every time they're like stuck on their investigation. He's like, oh, probably this thing. Oh, crap. Damn, shouldn't have said, I'm not supposed to help you out. I'm supposed to like stay over here. I'm one of the grown-ups. And he keeps getting kind of roped into the kids and the mystery that they're trying to deal with. And that's the other cool thing about these movies that I feel like doesn't really get pointed out as much. They're fantasies, but they're also mysteries. Like every one is like a Scooby-Doo mystery set in a magical school where they're just trying to be like to find out what's going on with the Sorcerer's Stone or the Chamber of Secrets or whatever. And I think that's another thing that really keeps people coming back. And it's every movie is sort of a not really kind of a whodunit, but it's basically an investigation. They're like little children detectives, basically.
Yeah, it's really fun because we're in it with them together. Like, oh wait, like, oh yeah, let's go to the library. Let's try and get, the book from the restricted section. I think it keeps us on our toes. And I love mysteries. Like I read like Nancy Drew, it was just so much fun. I think you're right. It's not talked about enough, but it is really fun how they incorporate different genres.
And you mentioned with Robbie Coltrane how no one could play Hagrid, so I would be remiss if we didn't spend at least a couple minutes talking about Alan Rickman.
Oh, Alan Rickman.
R.I.P. again, as Snape, who I still think the whole his like last sequence in Deathly Hallows 2 is probably one of the best sequences in the whole series, just because it finally brings that character, sheds a new light on him, and you kind of finally understand him, because speaking of mystery, he's the most mysterious because he's the one that we never know whose side he's on until basically the end of the story.
Yeah, it's really, he's the mystery that keeps on giving.
Yeah, pretty much. So like,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so he will be super harsh on them and kind of conspire against them one minute, and then the next minute he's doing a counter curse trying to protect them, or he, I know you don't like Azkaban, but he stands in front of to protect the kids from Lupin when he gets like all werewolfy, instead of just being like, here you go, got these kids, they're pissing me off. He has that complicated relationship with Harry specifically, and it's the ultimate reveal there. I think it's so powerful and stands up to how complex and also how fascinating he is as a character.
It is interesting. I do think Alan Rickman brought more heart and warmth to the character of Snape than in the book. In the book, I feel there's more malice to him and more bullying of Harry. And it makes me not like, yeah, maybe there's some redeemable qualities, but he was pretty much obsessed with Lily, his mom. And that's the only reason why he even has an inkling to protect Harry. In the book, in the movie, it's Alan Rickman. You can't hate him. And I think there's more, he gives him more than just a bully to Harry. And I feel like that was much needed for that character, because then you get someone who is still unredeemable whereas, with Alan Rickman, I think he's very redeemable at that end sequence, what you were saying.
Right. But I think it's also great too, because casting him, you're also kind of influencing the audience to not trust him, because he's Alan Rickman and he's super charismatic and all that, but he's also Hans Gruber and he's also the Sheriff of Nottingham. So he's best known for playing a villain. So when you cast him in this role that he seems like a villain, it kind of clouds things in an interesting way that I don't know if you would have gotten if you had. Apparently it was supposed to be Tim Roth, which I'm like, I don't know if I would have been as good. I don't think that would have been as good.
I just cocked my head to the side and like, what?
How would that have even worked? I think, the actors, especially with the adults in this movie, they carried their reputation of what you've seen them in and what their image is and all that stuff. And I think that really actually helps his performance as Snape, because you're sort of mistrustful of him from the beginning because of the kinds of roles you've seen him play in the past, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, just one look for him, it's like, oh, I better stop, And he does deliver a great performance, because you don't want to like him. You want to think he's bad. and he doesn't really give you any notion that he isn't. And I think it's a testimony to what you said, what he was previously cast in, and how good of an actor he is.
Right. I think the like pale skin and the like greasy dark hair. It's like they're kind of. I mean, it's also, that sounds very much like Loki from the MCU.
Or Kylo Ren.
Or Kylo. Yes. Yeah. See, that's like you're coding him as a villain. You might as well have him wear a black hat and everyone else is wearing white. I mean, it's kind of that whole thing again. And I think, it's a testament to the design of these characters and these, the world, that it is designed to be sort of misleading in that way. And I think he's definitely one of the most interesting characters in all the movies. And you only get a sliver of what he's all about in this one.
Yes. And, but you want to know more, which I think is great. And, Snape was always going to be there, and Harry even knew that. He was like, I need to be watchful of this one.
And I think the antagonistic relationship between Harry and Snape is ultimately the most prominent one, because Malfoy is just kind of there as like, because he has to be, basically. It's like, you're not going to have a movie with teenagers, well, not yet at this stage, but pretty much, where without having you're not going to have Spider-Man without Flash Thompson, that kind of thing. So you need someone there. And obviously later in the series, I'll talk about, in other episodes, I'll talk about Malfoy's arc and where he kind of ends up, which is really interesting in a different way.
Book 6.
Yeah, exactly. I actually like that one a lot. The movie.
It's so good. It's probably one of my favorite movies.
Yeah, see, me too. I feel like a lot of people were more disappointed with it for whatever reason. I mean, I think because they cut down a lot of the young Voldemort stuff. But how many scenes in a movie are you gonna have? You can't have 5 scenes of young Voldemort. It's like they have other things going on. They had the 2 main ones in there. So anyway, we're going off track. But
it's true. You got to pick and choose. It's sort of like how in Sorcerer's Stone I was disappointed that they didn't have all of the challenges needed to get through, because they left off Snape's potions trial that Hermione really figures out. But I get it. They couldn't include it.
Yeah, you have to streamline it a little bit. And I think this one does a good job at minimizing the amount that they have to streamline. Plus, the other fun thing with Snape is that he is, the potions master, but he's always gunning for the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. And the kind of running joke that it's just a new teacher every year, I really love that too. I think that's really fun that position has kind of been basically cursed, where here it's Quirrell, then it's Lockhart, then it's Lupin, then Mad-Eyed Moody, et cetera, et cetera. And I love the way that well, not even really Mad-Eyed Moody, but that's a whole separate thing.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, because you didn't read the book. What did you think of Quirrell when you first met him in the movie?
I mean, I think he just seems like kind of a stock character when you watch it without knowing anything about him. He's just like the nerdy, shy one, and you don't put it together until after you've seen the movie, till the second viewing. Well, of course, he doesn't want to shake his hand because he's got Voldemort's face on the back of his head, and so. Which sounds more ridiculous than it actually is in the one. I guess it's still kind of ridiculous, but
no, it is.
Well, I mean, when you see Voldemort, right before he's about to be reborn, he's just like a little tiny snake baby, kind of. But But yeah, he did, because when he makes physical contact with him, that's what happens at the end of the movie. That's how Harry defeats him. I think, they do. It's good. It's good misdirection, having him just be enough in the background so that he seems inconspicuous, but still he's constantly present enough that when you go back, you're like, oh, I see what's going on. He was behind some of these things. It's a little bit like, not as detailed, obviously, but it's a little bit like The Sixth Sense, where you go back and watch, you're like, oh, because of this would have happened if this had happened. And it fits together in an interesting way. But most of these kinds of stories, you would have sort of the buffoonish, the scaredy cat, which with the kids is Ron gets all the comic relief with his it's fear of spiders and all these other things. He's always shrieking to Harry about Harry.
Yes.
Poor Rupert Grint, he just had to act scared a lot of the time. But I think,
It's true.
But I think I like where Quirrell's story goes, and I think it's a good introduction to Voldemort without really giving us proper Voldemort, because we don't get him in the flesh until halfway through this saga, halfway through the series, really.
Unless you count him being in flesh, kind of, for
the dream,
the diary.
The book version of him. Yeah, I guess. But you don't. Yeah, he doesn't like officially come back until the end of fourth. Yeah, in an 8 film franchise. So I think it's a good way to have Harry sort of face that literal sort of demon without actually, I guess, developing the story to that point, because that's part of the chosen one narrative here, is that he's got this tragedy that literally marks him, and he's got the burden of his past, and it's just like his journey to like discover what makes him special, his destiny, and facing off against Voldemort. And it's like, this is way too early in the story for that to happen. So it keys it up enough without laying its full hand out there. And I think Quirrell is basically a vehicle to do so.
Oh, for sure. It's nice though that watching it wasn't a dead giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
Which that's nice.
Yeah, I think so too.
Again, Alan Rickman does such a good job.
Yes, he does. God.
I think one of my favorite introductions was to Malfoy. At the beginning, before they go into the sorting hat ceremony, and just that little pompous, sleeked back, platinum blonde hair. It really did a good job to set up that sort of like nemesis structure between him and Harry, and kind of gave us an inkling more into Ron's life, which I think they were setting up from the train until there, as the sympathetic friend. Right.
And yeah, this I think it's interesting too, because you see in this movie, you see a lot of the seeds that pay off in later movies. The whole thing with Hermione being excuse the profanity, mudblood, the pure like wizarding families, and the status within the wizarding community, the whole thing with Scabbers and how that turns out. I think there's a lot of that in here, and I don't know. Maybe you know more about this than I do. I'm not 100% sure how much J.K. Rowling had planned from the beginning, and how much was just sort of retcon, like not retcon, but sort of retrofitted into it. You know what I mean? Because there's certain elements in the last story in Deathly Hallows, everything like fits together, and it feels like everything and every character that you've met has a purpose in that the big finale.
It's like she created a puzzle piece.
Yeah. And
puzzle, and it's like boop, boop, boop.
Right. And it fits together in a really impressive way. I'm just wondering, like, was it laid out that way, or was it kind of like the second and third Pirates of the Caribbean movies, which the only reason I'm mentioning that is the whole thing, the way that they retconned that compass to serve a completely different function in the story, which was not intended in the first movie. Like, did she just see opportunities and then kind of pull on those threads, or did she have a sort of a map for kind of where this was going? It looks like the latter, but I suspect it was kind of a mix of both.
I believe there was a mix of both. If I can remember, I think she had the ending planned out all along. See, that's what I thought. Okay, it does claim that J.K. Rowling had an ending of the story that was written before she found a publisher.
Okay. And I think famously, I think she told Alan Rickman like about the twist with him, like midway through the franchise or early on. I'm not sure exactly what point she did that, but I think that one for sure, I think she had planned at least at some point further along. But yeah, I think it's, again, the world building is really fantastic in this movie, and this is the first one that has to do it. And I think it really plays out in a very satisfying way going forward. Did you feel, since this movie is almost 20 years old, do you feel that the visual effects hold up, or is it a little fuzzy at points?
So for me, I'm not a big fan of CGI. I really prefer like any sort of practical use, but I get how CGI is very helpful. Going back and looking at it, I don't mind it because it doesn't seem overly fake to me. Like I'm sure Fluffy could have used some help.
I think to me, the sequence that it really stands out is the troll. It's really not really bad. Like that sequence is, and that's, you know, I 100% agree with you as far as practical versus, digital effects, is that digital effects, no matter how good they are, they're always going to look crappy eventually because it will get better. Practical effects, if it's there, it's there. It's tangible. There's no need to make it look real because it was really there. So
I always hate the troll part because of how bad that troll looks.
And then
I always want to forget it.
Harry is on his back, and it's like he's like the little rubber man kind of thing, like you see in some of the earlier superhero movies too, like Spider-Man on the roof of, like in the first Spider-Man, like with Sam Raimi, things like that. Like I feel like for the most part, some of it works, but I mean, what's wrong with puppets and, you know, makeup and matte paintings and things like that? I mean, I think
there is nothing wrong with that.
That all works much, much better. And I think you look at something like, and it is a fantasy movie, you look at something like The Princess Bride, which is technically a fantasy movie, not the same scope as something like this, obviously, but it's all sets, it's all matte paintings, and it all works because guess what? You're in a fairy tale anyway. You're literally in a storybook in that one, so it doesn't have to look real even.
No, but that one I think holds up the best. To be honest, Princess Bride, it's so good. The little swamp rat creatures, I forget what they're called.
The rats of unusual size or something?
Yes. Like they look real almost. Like in that world, I'm like, yeah, those would be what that is. Sure. And you believe it. You're invested in it. That troll. Oh no. Now that's all I'm seeing. And this little tiny head. Oh, it's weird. It does not hold that particular part. No,
that could have been a guy in a suit, and then just like perspective, have him look like larger than the kids and such. But
yeah, they should have just pulled a Jurassic Park thing almost,
right.
You know?
Yeah, or
little CGI overlay.
Or if nothing else, you do the very same year, Lord of the Rings had a troll also in Fellowship, and that one, at least it's like super dark, so you can barely see it, kind of. You see the troll, but not enough for it to really stand out how, like, barely rendered it is on screen. And I think that's that for the most part. I think the effects in these movies, and obviously as the movies go on and the effects get better, there's becomes less and less of an issue. But again, who said in another 20 years we'll look at Deathly Hallows and be like, oh man, you believe we bought that in 2011?
That's true. I think the only thing I can't get behind in the first movie is that troll.
Yeah, that's the linchpin for me. That's why I immediately called that. I'm like, what about the troll? Let's get to that.
Well, yeah, see, I just want to forget it. But I get why they needed the troll. It's a plot point with Hermione. I get it.
Right. That friendship has a sort of a rough patch I think right around that point of the story.
Yeah, I get it. They don't like her because she's bossy and eager.
That's true. And then later on, one of them ends up with her, and the other one, everyone, including J.K. Rowling, is like, yeah, he should have ended up with her. Thoughts on that whole thing?
I mean, reading the book, I love Ron and Hermione together. Mm-hmm. In the movie, it's different. I mean, I never thought Harry and Hermione, though.
Right.
I always liked the idea of Harry and Luna.
Yeah, that would be weird. That would be interesting.
Well, they just have that moment with the Thrustrials, and I feel like, I was like, oh, that's a deeper bond than what, him and Jenny had. But, there's a lot of different ships in the fandom. A lot of people have wicked opinions about it.
Sure.
My though, like I definitely, I'm like, she says that now, but I'm like, I really don't see Harry and Hermione together. I like that it was a friendship. I like they almost had, a brother-sister relationship.
And it's interesting too, as the actors and the characters grow up, you have that point in Deathly Hallows Part 1 where Ron is sort of jealous of Harry because obviously he's into Hermione, and that's kind of a relationship that's like on the verge of starting, I guess, because they're not really technically together until I guess the very end of the story, but it's like keyed up over like especially Half-Blood Prince and then leading into Deathly Hallows. And it's interesting the way that plays out, having watched them as children. And then there's, that vision that appears to Ron with Harry and Hermione, like basically naked, essentially. Yeah. And it's like, wow, Harry Potter has grown up, clearly.
Yep.
And Bri's like, I knew that from when I saw him in Equus. So
I'm so embarrassed. But I wouldn't take that back. I think according to Emma, though, that was a really awkward scene.
Yeah.
To play out. Which I don't blame her. I mean, she grew up with these two guys.
Exactly.
They're both like her brothers to her. And she's like, oh, great.
Well, they had to. I think the thing with Ginny is that I think J.K. Rowling felt like Harry had come to accept the Weasleys as his surrogate family throughout the course of the series. And I guess she felt like she needed to literalize that. So she's like, oh, well, there you go. She's got nothing for Harry. It's all good.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It seems like too on the nose to me. And I'm just like, oh.
It's kind of a nothing love story with the two of them. It's kind of a nothing love story where he's like, you're here. We're always hanging out together because I'm friends with your brother. Let's get married and have kids. Sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's a whole nother thing. The epilogue. Oh, gosh. Could definitely leave that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm actually going to ask about that in a second. One other thing I wanted to mention too, that obviously it's not in these movies, is that we don't even realize when we're watching these in the 2000s that these are period pieces in canon, all set in the 90s. And I think that's really fun and kind of interesting that J.K. Rowling just straight up like labeled it like, nope, this is he was born in 1980 and this is 1981 because that's, if you go to the website, the wiki, and Pottermore or whatever, I forget now, they have a different website now, but this is all just set throughout the 90s. And I think that's kind of interesting that she gave it a year and like setting as opposed to sort of making it timeless, because there's no reason for her to really do that. It does kind of feel like it exists outside of that.
Yeah, I think as a writer, though, if I was to write this, I would want to make an understanding of a timeline for myself. So I think that's what she kind of did and just stuck with it instead of going back and maybe thinking, well, the first Wizarding War could have happened at any point. This could have happened any point. But almost like kind of when you like have to figure out a timeline, well, how old would this person be here? It's kind of interesting, although, well, I don't know how much of that timeline really matters anymore due to what happened in Fantastic Beasts 2 with McGonagall. Because now, because as, we all know the timeline, we're like, wait, that's not supposed to be there. McGonagall is not supposed to be at Hogwarts at that point in time. And then gets confusing. But it's actually, I don't know, it's interesting because I think for most people, it should be timeless, but I kind of like the fact that it's 90s.
Yeah.
But maybe that's my nostalgia. Being like, oh, the 90s, the good old days.
Well, at least, I mean, the movies never, they're never like hanging out listening to like Alanis Morissette or anything. So they don't, they don't date it that way.
No, they don't have the tragic 90s clothing either.
Well, they're in robes most of the time, I guess. Anyway, so they don't really have to deal with that. Yeah. So I have a couple more questions I wanted to get into, and then we can kind of start winding down here. First of all, now that you brought it up, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the Fantastic Beasts movies? Because I actually saw the first one and was very meh with it. So I actually still haven't seen The Crimes of Grindelwald 100%. So because I the fact that I wasn't really blown away by the first one, the fact that it feels so disconnected from this story that I'm actually invested in. And then there's the whole Johnny Depp thing that I'm like, I'm kind of over him now. What are your thoughts on those movies? And I guess the continuing franchise that they're really sticking to that 5-movie plan for some reason.
I think it could be good. I actually really enjoyed Newt. I enjoy Eddie Redmayne as Newt Scamander. I enjoy visiting other parts of the Wizarding world, and I enjoy other timelines. That being said, J.K. Rowling is not a screenwriter at all. She doesn't know how to really write for the screen, and I feel like I wish she wrote books before the movies. I think in the books she's allowed to have more freedom to write more in depth, and allow us. This is why I kind of liked reading the books before, because I went into the movies having more knowledge and understanding a little more in depth. So when I was watching the movies, I felt like I knew a little more. So it was fine. I don't know why. But with these movies, I feel like there's a lot of information to get to, and she's rushing everything. So we're not taking our same time to get to things. And Johnny Depp was a very letdown for me as Grindelwald. I wish they kept him as Colin Farrell.
Yeah. Colin Farrell was great in that first one.
Yeah, or bring back Jamie Bauer Campbell, who did play him in the flashback scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
And I'm like, Jamie Bauer Campbell's an excellent actor. Why couldn't he have done it? And so the second one, actually, Geeky Girl Gab, we did a whole podcast on Crimes of Grindelwald because it was slightly an utter disaster. There just needed to be more scenes, I think, to allow character growth, and that's not being allowed right now. It's stunted. But I mean, because I would really like a Marauder show, going back to when Lily and James were in school. I think there's a lot that could be done with Sirius, and it would be just fun. But I don't think J.K. Rowling should write, and not the guy who wrote Cursed Child, because that was a huge flop in my opinion.
Well, that's actually the next question I was going to ask. So you mentioned that you're not a fan of the epilogue here. Do you want any kind of proper follow-up to this series, either an adaptation of Cursed Child or something else? I mean, Daniel Radcliffe is 30 now, and then going by the J.K. Rowling approved timeline, Harry is, I think, 37 in the epilogue. So he's kind of getting, like, if they were going to do that, like, it's almost time to start working on it. Yeah.
Yeah and no. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and Cursed Child is there, and I wish it wasn't. It read like a giant fanfic, which is kind of like what the epilogue did, of like, especially the naming of the kids. I just was like, really now? Like, what is going on? I just couldn't deal with it. And maybe, that's just my opinion. But it just, like, Harry getting mad all the time and not accepting, his kid getting into Slytherin and having this whole thing. I was like,
feels like a step backwards a little bit.
Yes.
You named your kid after Severus Snape, who was head of Slytherin House. So yeah.
Yeah. And he even said too in the epilogue, like, it doesn't matter what house you get into. So where did that logic go? Like, out the window? I just realized, like, a kid who was tormented by, Petunia and what's his face?
Vernon.
Vernon, yeah.
Which is why it's always funny to me where Dumbledore's like, he's better off here with these people. I'm like, is he though? I don't know.
I know, like, really? Are we just giving him more PTSD?
Yeah, sort of.
really. Like, I just feel like he would take time with his kids, like, to explain things, like, because that's one thing that Harry never got and was upset about, especially in year 5, was no one communicated with him. And he, that's where more of his PTSD shows up, I think. And I feel like he'd be big on communication. And in this play, I'm like, what is going on? It just feels like he didn't understand Harry's character. Like, he was just trying to create this thing. So if they were going to do something now, I volunteer to write something if they're up for it. Like, I'll do it. I got you, JK. I'll make everything better.
Well, I think, to play devil's advocate for a second, I think that's kind of isn't that kind of his arc in The Cursed Child? Because I read it, but it was like, it is very disposable, I think, in a way. Like, I finished reading and I was like, okay, I read it. Okay, cool, done. So it didn't stick with me. I think his arc is to realize, wait a minute, I'm making the same mistakes the people were making with me. Isn't that kind of his turn towards the end?
But the thing is like, would he need to learn that? Because I feel like he would already know that. It just seems like a very, like, unnatural stance and just trying to create drama, when maybe there could have been, like, a new Dark Lord trying to uprise, like, it could have been about family issues. But I would think more so that Albus was more feared of who he was internally and, like, trying to escape what he thought he could become. And that would have been interesting, because then Harry's arc could have been showing understanding and showing Albus, what he did. It's like, I try to run from this whole, because Harry was reluctant to be chosen one anyway, and he had to come to terms to deal with that. So I think showing Albus, like, coming to terms with identity and who you are would have been a stronger arc for him than just learning not to do what, not communicate and yell a lot and not be accepting.
Right.
I don't know. It feels very left field for Harry, instead of, like, making him stronger as a person.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, in the cinematic landscape that we're in now, I think it's inevitable they're going to do something with this franchise once Fantastic Beasts has run its course or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see if they do pick that up and brush it off and adapt it and maybe correct some of the issues that fans like yourself are calling it out for. And like, well, okay, we can do Cursed Child, we can have it based on that, but let's fix this element of it because it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
So, is there anything about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone we didn't talk about and we didn't get into that you wanted to mention?
I will say we didn't really talk about Vernon or Petunia.
We did not,
yet.
Yeah.
Granted, why should we get child
they're not very nice. They don't need airtime.
But I will say they were very good, though. That who actors they got were great, and they think, you need that in the story to really understand who Harry is, what makes him who he is, and why this magical world is so important to him. And I really think they did a great job going, how they did it, the stupid Dudley. It's like, well, I wanted 37. I only counted 36.
You see it in Harry's face in that moment, too. He looks over and he's not even like, oh, my cousin's silly. He already looks pissed off. Like, you could see the anger on his face. And that's when I saw that, I immediately thought of Order of the Phoenix, where he's like, I'm just so angry all the time. I'm like, yeah, I can see that from like your first scene in the movie. That you've been dealing with this crap for 10 years, and now you get to discuss this, now you discover you're special, and you're like, okay, everything is solved. Meanwhile, you have now the burden of being a chosen one. You have everyone who's sort of telling you half-truths and guiding you, kind of haphazardly through these mysteries and adventures. When it'd be very easy for Dumbledore to sit you down and be like, listen, this is what's happened. This is my plan. Let's work together on this. Instead, he's just like, no, I'm going to keep you at an arm's length, thinking he's doing the best for him. And I think, honestly, there's probably something to that, as far as it feels like there's an analog for child rearing in general, there, where it's like, well, I'm gonna, back in the day, the father was very like traditional gender roles, and was like, well, I'm gonna work and I'm gonna pat you on the head, and then you're gonna go to bed, and I'm gonna keep you at a distance, and that'll make you stronger or whatever. Like, I feel like there's some elements of that kind of mindset in the adults, I think, in the story.
Yeah. And yeah, I love that moment. I think it just does a great job of understanding where he's come from and why he's going to fight for Hogwarts and the magical world, because it's really what he has.
Plus, you get a little tease for the parcel tongue to come early on in this one too, which is cool. Which, again, if she had that plan, that's genius. If she was just like, I can make that in the next one. I think that's little things like that when you go back and rewatch this franchise from the beginning, you're like, oh, snap. He was speaking parcel tongue, and we were seeing it from his perspective. So it looks like he was saying English, but meanwhile, he's going to the snake in the middle of the zoo. And I think that's really cool to have that, that full context and perspective of the story.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And, it almost is like that moment, whether subconscious or not, we're like, oh, could Harry be the heir of Slytherin? Because that thing happened in the first movie.
Right.
Like, It almost makes us question what we know about him.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes his storyline that much richer, the parallels between him and Voldemort and the connection that they share and all that.
Yeah. It builds it up, and it's epic.
Well, that's, I think, the perfect way to end this conversation. Yeah. So, Bri, can you tell listeners where they can find you on social media?
Yeah. Personally, you can find me at Bri Azmoudeh, which is a very long name. I don't know why I just gave that out. Or just find me at Geeky Girl Gab, which is my podcast with Candace. And you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr under the same name.
Thank you so much, Bri, for coming on and helping us kick off the Harry Potter series. And we'll definitely have to get you back on here at some point to talk about something else. So just let me know if you think of anything, and we'll definitely be in touch and get you back on the show.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me. Harry Potter has really shaped my life. And, it's been something that, I always geek out over. Truly, forever and ever. I will never stop. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, that's I'm really now excited as well about looking at these movies and seeing them, experiencing them all over again, because it's been a while since I've gone back and watched them. So it's fun to kind of bask in the Harry Potter fandom for a bit. Yeah,
you should make Mrs. Weasley's special fudge and butterbeer when you do watch them.
Oh, the butterbeer is so good. At least the one in Universal.
I know. We have a rinky-dink version over here in Hollywood. Oh, it's not the same, but yeah. I mean, I try to go there and enjoy it.
I should look that up. Look up. I'm sure there's a million recipes online of how people are trying to replicate that. I should.
Oh yeah, next time there's a really good one.
Either for when I'm watching the movie or when I'm recording the next podcast, be sitting here with a
beer. And if you like alcohol, there's a really good one that includes Frangelico in it.
Interesting.
Real good.
Cool. You'll have to send that to me, I think.
I will.
After the show. Well, thanks so much again, Bri, for coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you again for having me.
If you're interested in joining me on the show to chat about one of your favorite films, head on over to crookedtable.com/guest. Or you can consider supporting the show at patreon.com/crookedtable. Of course, you can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies over at crookedtable.com. Until next time, this has been the Crooked Table Podcast, and I've been Rob.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.